We'll do a review in Likutei Sichos in Chelik Ches, volume 28, and this is the third sicha for the Parshas Naso. In the Parsha, it talks about that the Aron and the other Kalim were carried by the Bnei Kohos, not on agolis, not on wagons, but they put it on their shoulders. But when you look in the Rambam singles out the Aron as not being carried, as having to be carried by on the shoulder. And what about all the other kalim that were also carried? It seems like from this pasuk that the Rambam brings, it says avodas hakodesh aleim bakosef yiso, which means that the holy vessels, all the holy vessels that they carried were carried on the shoulder. What's unique? Why does the Rambam single out specifically the Aron? And the Rebbe has a whole explanation. The Rebbe comes up with this novel idea and chiddush, which fits according to Pnimis Inyonim, as the Rebbe said, that the Aron has a unique mitzvah that not only shouldn't you be putting on the wagons, but the place of the Aron is on the shoulder. Just like the place of the Aron has to be in the Aron, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, when it's stationary, the place for the Aron is on the shoulders of the Levim. And it's a obligation where the Aron must be, not only where the person needs to hold them. And that's why the Rebbe explains the Lashonis, as we'll go step by step. The Rebbe explains this difference between the Aron and the rest of the Kelim. Naso Gimel, Aleph. The Rambam rules that be'ez shemelichin es ha'aron memokim l'mokim, when at the time that we lead the Aron from place to place. Now, mostly we're talking about in the desert, but as we'll see a little bit later on, how it applies to later on as well. But the Rambam rules in a general way that when you move the Aron mimokim l'mokim from one place to another place, you don't lead it not on top of an animal and not on top of a wagon. The mitzvah is to carry it on the shoulders. And the Rambam says, Shenemar, because the pasuk says, Ki avodas hakodesh aleihem, bakosev yiso, the work of the holy is on them. They have to carry it by shoulder. The other Levim that carried the Bnei Merari and the other brothers, they carried the other sons of Levi. They carried on the agolis. They carried the beams and the curtains and the other things. They carried on agolis, but the Knei Kahos, because they are avodas hakodesh, they carry the kelim. So therefore, it has to be bakosev yiso. They have to carry it on the shoulder. That's in the Rambam in Halacha. Then the Rambam is Sefer HaMitzvah, the Minyan HaMitzvahs, rechon the Rambam, the mitzvah. The Rambam counts this mitzvah, loses es ha'oren al hakosef, to carry the oren on the shoulder. And the Rebbe writes that the Rambam is both in the Sefer HaMitzvahs and also in the heading. The Rambam writes, Los HaKorn al HaKosev al mitzvah b'fnei atzma. It's a mitzvah by itself, it is a special mitzvah to carry the Aron, not associated and not connected with all the other kelim. A special mitzvah to carry the Aron on the shoulder. That's the way the Rambam says it in Minyan HaMitzvahs. So the Rebbe says, is Yadu the Shaila? So the question that is no. In the posting was the Rambam brings, the verse that the Rambam brings, because if you saw this posting they should carry by shoulder, steht doch mefeirish, over there it says very clearly, V'lei kahos, Gershon and Merari, they got wagons. But it says, V'livnei kahos, leinosan. The Eibusha didn't give them the Agolis carriages. Ki avoidas hakodesh aleihem, because of Yisrael, since the holy work is on them, they carry the holy thing, so they should carry by shoulders. That would include all the kelim of the Beis Hamikdash, not only the Aron. That's what the pasuk says. The Bnei Kahos were carrying all the kelim. Rashi is das mefarish. What does it mean? Avodas hakodesh aleim. Rashi is mefarish. Masa dovor hakadosha. They carried something, the item that was sanctified, and Rashi enumerates Aron, Vashulchan, V'Goyver, which means that they had to carry all of these kedusha dike vessels. Those haste. Der tzivui bakosef yisou batzitzich nit blois oifen Aron. This passage bakosef yisou does not only talk about the Aron, nor oich of the andere Klei Hamikdash, but also with the other, the shulchan, the table, the menorah, the candelabra, the mizbachos, and the altars, the two of the altars. Is farvos paskun the Rambam? So how come the Rambam rules as the mitzvah is blois? The mitzvah consists only losses as Aron ala kosef, to carry the Aron on the shoulder. Why the Aron? Why only the Aron? Now, thing is that the other kelim, menorah, the shulchan, they were only carried at the time in the desert. And later on, once the Beis Hamikdash was built, there was no carrying. The only thing that they carried later on sometimes was the Aron. So the Rebbe says perhaps we can say that the reason the Rambam only counts the Aron as a mitzvah, because the Aron is for later on times. It's not just at the time of the desert when they were traveling, but it was all the time. But the other kelim were only for that period of time. That's not counted in the mitzvahs, things that were only for temporary. Look inside. Simply we can say, in minyan ha-mitzvahs rechen der Rambam nor the mitzvahs welche seine noid l'doros. In the counting of the mitzvahs, the Rambam only counts those mitzvahs which apply and we conduct themselves for the generations to come, not only what happened at a certain time. On the far, that's why he's only counting the carrying of the Aron. Weil die Psukim mein Razal, was der Rambam bringt wegen Bakosif Yisou L'Doros, the verses that the Rambam brings down, that also for the later generations you keep on carrying the Aron, seine Nor b'negei dem Aron. Those psukim that the Rambam brings down, that it wasn't only back at the time of the Midbar, when the people journeyed Midbar, but in the future, those verses only are b'negei dem Aron, or nit b'negei de andere Klei Hamikdash, as we'll see soon the pasuk that the Rambam brings. So other Klei Hamikdash, welche seinen given b'masa b'nei kos, which were also included in the carrying of the b'nei kos. Die Mesetas von der Rayes, was bringt in Sefer HaMitzvahs. You see from the proof of the Rayes that it brings in Sefer HaMitzvahs, they only apply the evidence that they carried also later on, the Rebbe will bring it down soon, is only from the Aron that we see that they carried after the midbar, after they were journeying, still carried the Aron on the shoulders, but we don't have it with regards to any of the other Kalim, and therefore we can say the Pashtas. That's why the Rambam doesn't mention about the mitzvah of carrying the other vessels because they didn't apply for generation. The only thing that applied, it applies to the Aron. Further, the Rebbe says even more. Nochma. Rabbi Avraham ben Harambam is Mavayev. Rabbi Avraham, the son of Rambam, he explains as from dem Posif wo se retzich wegen Gnizas Aron durch Yeshayahu. There's a verse that discusses that Yeshayahu went and he hid the Aron in Divrei Yomim Beis by the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So it says, Vayemer leLevim. So he says to the Levim, Tenu es Aron HaKodesh Babayis HaShabona Shloima Goimer. You put the Aron Kodesh into the structure that Shloima built. Ein lachem masa bekosov. He says you have no more carrying on the shoulder. Now it's going to be in the Beis Hamikdash. He did it because of the prophecy, the Eibishter proud of the Navi that Yelech Hashem es Malkachot, that they're going to go to Golus. So he put it away over there. He says, Ein lochem maseh bekosov. So what do we see from this? Is muchach bei de Zachen, the Rebbe says. We see both areas over here. On one hand, we see Abizmanahu noch binyan HaMikdash, that at that time, it was already after the building of the Mikdash, is Allah beim Oren noch ausgewend der Chiv Masse bekosov, that by the Oren there was still the obligation of carrying on the shoulder. He says you no longer will have it once the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. But during the time of the Beis Hamikdash, even though it was after the Midbar and after all the Mishkan, still they were carrying by his shoulder, because at this point he's telling them you're not going to have it anymore. Well, this is already in the Bais Rishon. On base, the other thing we see by the andere Klei Hamikdash is das nicht given. But the other Klei Hamikdash didn't tell them to go hide them because you're not going to have the work anymore of carrying it. Weil der Chiv Masse Bakosev b'negei Yazeh is bottled geworden bei Binyan HaMikdash, because the obligation to carry it on the shoulder was finished, became bottled after when they built the Beis HaMikdash. And so there's no more carrying. There's no more, it's a stationary, it's a permanent place, not like by the Mishkan where they needed to carry all the time. So therefore, there was no more this idea of carrying. So it's not a mitzvah l'doides for the other one. The only place where it's a mitzvah l'doides is for the Aron, because the Aron continued even by the Binyan Beis Hamikdash until Yeshua said no. That there's no longer going to be, because the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed. And the Rebbe adds in the bracket, und das was von demult on ein is ba'orin ein lechem masse bekosov. He says at that time that the orin, there's no more masse bekosov. So why? Doesn't mean that the mitzvah was bottled. The mitzvah is still there. So it's also going to be a mitzvah l'doidus. The reason why there's not going to be, because there's not going to be an orin, there's not going to be nothing to carry. Is nit mevatel the mitzvah when he says you're not going to be able, you're not going to carry the bekosov. That doesn't say because you're taking away the mitzvah, there's no more mitzvah to carry the order. Asulib dem zol masse ha'orim because of niteisna mitzvah shenehegel l'doros. That because they're not doing it now, so that's why we're going to say, well, it's not for generations. With regards to the Kalim, at that point there was no more mitzvah. The mitzvah was this battle was only for the time of the desert until the big Beis Hamikdash. But here, even though they're not going to carry it, but it's not because we battle the mitzvah. Because what happens is it's all generations. Whenever the Aron needs to be carried, it's only carried by Kosov. The mitzvah to carry the other kelim no longer exists by Kosov. But the mitzvah of the Aron is always. There is no more, because there's no Aron. Whenever you need to carry, then there is a mitzvah to carry the Aron. Ke'ein bittul lemitzvah. When does it call, when we say a mitzvah has ceased, stop? It's only because it doesn't apply. Not because we don't need it, because there's no order, so we don't need to carry it. That's not called this battle the mitzvah. Mitzvah is still there. This battle the mitzvah means there's no more mitzvah. There's no more mitzvah there. Here there's still a mitzvah. There's no practical application. The Rambam is Mavayir in Sefer HaMitzvah, so the Rambam explains this in Sefer HaMitzvah. Is Memela, with regards to the other Kalim, the mitzvah stopped. So it's not a mitzvah nagas v'doides. The mitzvah lechatchila was only for the time when they needed it, when they were journeying. The mitzvah for the Aron, on the other hand, is all the time. And the fact that it stopped after by the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, that Yeshayahu hit it, that was because it was no longer a practical, because of the fact that the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed. So that would answer the question that the Rebbe asked, why the Rambam singles out the Aron, because the Aron's mitzvah is a mitzvah l'doiris, and the mitzvah to carry the other kelim is only for the time being while they were in the desert or until the building of the Beis Hamikdash.